The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before him, a canvas of infinite darkness dotted with the shimmering brilliance of distant stars. The human man, let us call him Kale, floated weightlessly inside the sleek, metallic confines of his spacecraft. It was an unremarkable vessel by most standards, designed for exploration rather than luxury, its walls lined with blinking consoles and humming machinery that kept him alive in the cold vacuum beyond Earth's atmosphere. He had been drifting through this silent void for what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Kale wasn't sure how long it had been since he left Earth behind. Time seemed to lose meaning out here, where days blurred into nights without the comforting rhythm of sunrise or sunset. His mission had started as one of discovery, a journey to chart new star systems and uncover signs of life beyond humanity's home planet. But somewhere along the way, something changed. A signal, faint but unmistakable, had reached him from deep within the galaxy. It wasn't random noise. It carried structure, purpose. And so, driven by curiosity and perhaps a touch of desperation born from isolation, Kale altered course toward its source. As his ship approached the coordinates of the mysterious transmission, the emptiness around him began to shift. Stars grew denser, their light forming constellations unfamiliar to any map he'd studied back on Earth. Then came the planet, a swirling orb of violet clouds and golden lightning storms, suspended against the blackness like a jewel waiting to be claimed. Its beauty was haunting, almost otherworldly, and yet there was something about it that tugged at the edges of Kale's memory, though he couldn't place why. His instruments confirmed the presence of breathable air and stable gravity, enough to make landing feasible. With cautious optimism, Kale guided his craft down through the turbulent atmosphere, bracing himself as winds buffeted the hull and flashes of energy illuminated the cockpit in bursts of blinding light. When the turbulence finally subsided, he found himself standing on alien soil, surrounded by towering crystalline structures that pulsed faintly with an inner glow. They looked ancient, weathered by eons of existence, yet they radiated a sense of vitality that defied logic. It was then that he heard it, a sound unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Not quite speech, not quite song, it resonated in the air around him, vibrating through his bones and filling him with an inexplicable sense of awe. Turning slowly, Kale saw them emerge from the shadows cast by the glowing spires. Figures tall and slender, their forms encased in flowing garments that shimmered like liquid silver. Their faces were obscured beneath intricate masks adorned with patterns resembling fractals, each line shifting subtly as if alive. They moved with deliberate grace, surrounding him without hostility but with an undeniable air of authority. At first, Kale thought they might be some form of advanced artificial beings, constructs created by whatever civilization once thrived here. But when one stepped forward, removing her mask to reveal features that were strikingly humanoid yet distinctly alien, he realized these creatures were flesh and blood, or at least something close enough to pass for it. Her skin was pale lavender, smooth and luminous under the dim light, and her eyes held galaxies within them, swirling depths that seemed to pierce straight through him. She spoke, her voice melodic yet commanding, carrying a resonance that transcended language barriers. Somehow, Kale understood her words perfectly, as though they bypassed his ears entirely and entered directly into his mind. "You have come far," she said, tilting her head slightly as if studying him. "Farther than any others who dared venture into our domain." "I didn't mean to intrude," Kale replied haltingly, struggling to find his voice amidst the overwhelming strangeness of everything around him. "I followed a signal." "We know," she interrupted gently, raising a hand to silence him. There was no malice in her tone, only a quiet certainty that unnerved him more than anger ever could. "We sent it to see if you would answer." Confusion washed over Kale, mingling with a growing unease. "Why me? Why now?" Her gaze softened, and for a moment, she looked almost wistful. "Because you remind us of them," she said simply, gesturing vaguely toward the horizon where the crystalline spires stretched endlessly. "Of those who came before." Before Kale could respond, another figure emerged from the crowd, taller even than the rest, clad in robes that shimmered with iridescent hues. This one wore no mask, and her face bore an expression of regal poise tempered by something akin to sorrow. She carried herself with such dignity that Kale instinctively took a step back, bowing his head in deference despite himself. "Human," she addressed him, her voice rich and resonant, layered with centuries of wisdom. "Do you know what it means to stand among the echoes of your ancestors?" Kale blinked, unsure whether he'd heard correctly. "My ancestors," he stammered, glancing around at the assembled aliens, whose expressions ranged from curious to solemn. "But I'm just a traveler. I don't understand." "You will," the Queen interjected, her tone firm but not unkind. "In time, you will." She stepped closer, her movements fluid and deliberate, until she stood mere inches away from him. Up close, her features were even more striking. Her skin a deeper shade of violet, her eyes twin suns burning with intensity. She reached out a hand, hesitating briefly before placing it lightly on his shoulder. The gesture startled him, not because of its intimacy but because of the sudden flood of sensations it triggered. Memories, not his own, flashed unbidden across his mind. Images of great cities built from stone and glass, skies filled with ships powered by technologies he couldn't comprehend, faces that bore uncanny resemblances to his own. "These memories," Cale whispered, clutching his temples as the visions intensified. "They're not mine." "No," the Queen agreed softly, withdrawing her hand. "They belong to those who walked this path long before you. Your kind, human. Or at least, those who share your bloodline." Cale staggered backward, his thoughts spinning wildly. "That's impossible. Humans never left Earth until recently. We couldn't have." "Could you not?" she countered, her voice rising slightly, tinged with frustration. "Is it so difficult to believe that your history is not as linear as you think? That your people may have ventured farther than your records recall?" He opened his mouth to argue, to deny the absurdity of her claims, but the evidence was already mounting against him. The familiarity of the architecture, the resonance of their language in his mind, the way their very presence stirred something primal within him. It all pointed to a truth too profound to dismiss outright. Still, acceptance eluded him, clinging stubbornly to the boundaries of what he knew to be real. "You ask me to believe that humans once lived among you," he said finally, his voice trembling with equal parts disbelief and wonder. "That we shared this world, this legacy." "Yes," the Queen affirmed, her expression softening once more. "And more than that. You helped shape us, just as we shaped you. Together, we forged something greater than either race alone could achieve." "But why does it matter now?" Cale pressed, his confusion giving way to urgency. "If this connection exists, why reveal it to me after all this time?" For the first time since their encounter began, the Queen hesitated. Her gaze flickered toward the horizon, where storm clouds gathered ominously, casting jagged streaks of lightning across the sky. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of foreboding that sent a chill down Cale's spine. "Because the past is waking," she murmured, her words heavy with implication. "And when it does, you must be ready." With those cryptic words hanging in the air between them, the Queen turned away, signaling to her companions with a subtle wave of her hand. They began to move en masse, retreating into the shadowy recesses of the crystalline city while leaving Cale standing alone amidst the pulsating spires. He watched them go, his mind reeling with questions that refused to settle. What did she mean by "the past is waking"? Was this revelation meant to warn him, guide him, or simply overwhelm him with its enormity? As the last of the aliens disappeared from view, Cale realized he had no choice but to follow, to seek answers wherever they might lead, even if it meant confronting truths that challenged everything he thought he knew about himself and his species. Taking a deep breath, he set off after them, his footsteps echoing faintly against the alien terrain. The journey ahead promised to be fraught with uncertainty, but one thing was clear: whatever awaited him within the heart of this strange world, it would change him forever. As Cale ventured deeper into the crystalline labyrinth, the environment around him transformed in ways that defied comprehension. The spires, which had initially appeared static and lifeless, now pulsed with increasing vigor, their luminescence shifting through hues of azure, emerald, and gold. Each step he took seemed to awaken dormant energies within the structures, causing the air itself to hum with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in harmony with his heartbeat. It was as though the city recognized him, responding to his presence with a symphony of light and sound that bordered on sentient. The path led him into an expansive chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow high above. Here, the crystalline formations converged into massive pillars that spiraled upward like frozen tornadoes, their surfaces etched with intricate carvings that shimmered faintly in the dim glow. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested an artifact unlike anything Kale had ever seen. It was a sphere, roughly the size of his head, composed of countless interlocking facets that refracted light into dazzling rainbows. Yet it was not merely decorative. The sphere emitted a faint warmth, drawing him inexorably closer. When Kale touched the artifact, a surge of energy coursed through him, flooding his mind with fragmented images and emotions. He saw glimpses of ancient rituals, ceremonies where humans and aliens stood side by side, exchanging knowledge and forging bonds that transcended biology. There were scenes of cooperation, joint efforts to build colossal machines capable of manipulating the fabric of reality, and moments of conflict, battles fought against forces neither race fully understood. Through it all, the recurring theme was unity, a symbiotic relationship that elevated both civilizations to heights neither could achieve alone. Yet intertwined with these visions were darker threads, warnings of hubris, of powers misused and alliances fractured. Kale felt the weight of regret emanating from the artifact, a sorrow so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He pulled his hand away abruptly, gasping for breath as the torrent of information receded, leaving behind a lingering ache in his chest. Before he could process what he had witnessed, the Queen reappeared, flanked by several of her attendants. Her expression was unreadable, though her posture suggested a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Without speaking, she extended her arm toward the sphere, inviting him to approach once more. Hesitant but compelled, Kale complied, placing his palm against the cool surface again. This time, the artifact reacted differently. Instead of overwhelming him with sensory input, it projected a single coherent image into his mind, a map of the stars, marked with pathways connecting distant points across the galaxy. "This is the legacy," the Queen explained, her voice steady but laced with reverence. "A record of our shared history, encoded within this device. It contains the knowledge of our ancestors, their triumphs, their failures, and the choices that defined them. You are the first human in millennia to interact with it." Kale stared at her, his thoughts racing. "Why me? What makes me worthy of this?" "It is not about worthiness," she replied, stepping closer until she stood beside him. "It is about connection. The legacy responds only to those who carry the genetic imprint of its creators. In you, it senses the echoes of those who once wielded its power." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. "So, my DNA proves I'm descended from them? From the humans who lived here?" "Yes," she confirmed, her gaze piercing. "But there is more. The legacy has chosen you not just because of your lineage, but because of what lies ahead. Something stirs in the cosmos, something tied to the mistakes of the past. If left unchecked, it threatens to unravel everything we have built." Kale frowned, his mind grappling with the implications. "You mean, whatever happened to split our races apart? Is it coming back?" The Queen nodded gravely. "The rift between our peoples was born of fear and misunderstanding. We believed ourselves superior, and in our arrogance, we sought to control forces beyond our grasp. When disaster struck, blame fell upon your kind, leading to your exile from this world. But now, the consequences of that decision are returning to haunt us." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "The artifact holds the key to preventing catastrophe. But unlocking its secrets requires understanding. Understanding that can only come from someone who bridges both worlds. Someone like you." Kale swallowed hard, the enormity of the responsibility pressing down on him. "And if I fail?" The Queen's silence spoke volumes. Finally, she said, "Then the cycle will repeat, and all we have worked for will be lost." Determined to uncover the truth, Kale delved deeper into the mysteries of the legacy, guided by the Queen and her council of elders. They led him to a vast archive hidden beneath the crystalline city, a repository of knowledge preserved in holographic projections and tactile interfaces that responded to his touch. Here, he discovered records detailing the rise and fall of the alliance between humans and aliens, an era marked by unprecedented innovation and collaboration, but also marred by hubris and betrayal. One projection depicted a grand experiment conducted jointly by scientists from both races. They had sought to harness the energy of collapsing stars, believing it could provide limitless power. However, their calculations proved flawed, resulting in a catastrophic event known as the stellar collapse. Entire star systems were destabilized, unleashing waves of destructive radiation that devastated nearby planets. Panic spread as blame shifted between the two factions, culminating in accusations that humans had deliberately sabotaged the project to seize control of the technology for themselves. Though the Queen insisted otherwise, historical accounts painted a grim picture of escalating tensions. Humans were portrayed as opportunistic invaders, exploiting alien ingenuity while secretly plotting domination. Meanwhile, the alien perspective framed them as reckless aggressors whose actions jeopardized the safety of countless worlds. Amidst the chaos, diplomatic channels broke down, and violence erupted. Entire colonies were abandoned, and the once thriving partnership dissolved into bitter enmity. Yet as Kale sifted through the data, inconsistencies began to emerge. Certain logs contradicted official narratives, hinting at external influences manipulating events from behind the scenes. One entry caught his attention, a fragmentary transmission intercepted during the height of the crisis. It contained references to an unknown entity referred to only as the Architect, described as a being of immense intellect and malevolent intent. According to the message, the Architect had infiltrated both governments, sowing discord and steering key decisions toward disaster. Confronting the Queen with this revelation, Kale demanded answers. If there was interference, why wasn't it exposed? Why let everyone believe humans betrayed you? Her response was measured, tinged with regret. Fear clouded our judgment. By the time we suspected foul play, the damage was done. Revealing the truth would have required admitting our own complicity, and facing the possibility that we might never fully trust each other again. Anger simmered within Kale, fueled by the injustice of it all. So instead, you banished us. Sent us back to Earth with nothing but shame and suspicion. It was wrong, she admitted, her voice heavy with remorse. But survival often demands harsh choices. We hoped time would heal the wounds, allow future generations to rebuild what was lost. Clearly, we underestimated the scars left behind. As they spoke, Kale noticed subtle changes in the Queen's demeanor. Gone was the stoic authority she had displayed earlier. In its place was vulnerability, a willingness to confront painful truths. For the first time, he saw her not as a ruler but as a fellow survivor burdened by guilt and longing for redemption. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden tremor that shook the archive, sending shards of crystal raining from the ceiling. Alarms blared throughout the facility, and the Queen's attendants rushed to secure the area. Outside, the storm clouds thickened, crackling with electrical discharges that illuminated the city in stark relief. The past is waking faster than we anticipated, the Queen muttered, her expression grim. We must act quickly. Kale nodded, resolve hardening within him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. Uncovering the full story of humanity's role in this alien world was only the beginning. The real challenge would be finding a way to rewrite the ending. With the storm intensifying outside, the Queen ushered Kale and her council into a secure chamber deep within the crystalline city. Here, they convened around a circular table embedded with glowing runes that pulsed in sync with the legacy artifact. The atmosphere was tense, charged with urgency as the Queen addressed her advisors. "We cannot delay any longer," she declared, her voice cutting through the hum of activity. "The disturbances in the stellar fields are accelerating. If we do not intervene soon, the same forces that caused the stellar collapse will return, stronger than before." One of the elders, a gaunt figure with skin like polished obsidian, leaned forward. "Your Majesty, we must consider the risks of involving the human. While his connection to the legacy is undeniable, trusting him with such sensitive information could expose us to further vulnerabilities." Kale bristled at the implication but remained silent, allowing the Queen to respond. She fixed the elder with a steely gaze. "Our survival depends on unity, not division. If we repeat the mistakes of the past, we doom ourselves to failure. Kale carries the blood of our shared ancestors. He is as much a part of this as we are." The elder bowed his head reluctantly, though skepticism lingered in his eyes. Another advisor, younger and more animated, spoke up. "What of the Architect? If this entity truly orchestrated the rift between our peoples, it may still be influencing events. How can we ensure our plans remain untainted?" The Queen hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the table as if searching for answers etched in its surface. "We must proceed cautiously, verifying every step against the legacy's guidance. Kale's insight will be invaluable in identifying potential manipulations." Turning to him, she continued, "This is where your role becomes critical. The legacy has shown you fragments of our history, but now it must reveal the mechanisms of the stellar collapse itself. Only then can we devise a strategy to prevent its recurrence." Kale nodded, though unease gnawed at him. The weight of expectation pressed heavily on his shoulders, compounded by the knowledge that failure could mean annihilation for both races. Yet amidst the pressure, a spark of determination ignited within him. He had come too far to turn back now. Together, they returned to the central chamber housing the legacy artifact. Under the Queen's direction, Kale placed his hands on the sphere once more, focusing intently as it began to resonate with increasing intensity. Images flooded his mind, complex diagrams of energy matrices, equations describing the behavior of collapsing stars, and schematics for devices designed to stabilize volatile stellar phenomena. Among these, one construct stood out, a massive apparatus known as the harmonic nexus, capable of generating counter-frequencies to neutralize destructive radiation. The nexus, the Queen breathed, recognizing the design. It was incomplete when the collapse occurred. Without it, we lacked the means to contain the fallout. Kale's brow furrowed as he absorbed the details. "Can it be rebuilt?" "It can," she affirmed, though doubt shadowed her features. "But doing so requires resources scattered across multiple systems. Gathering them in time will be nearly impossible." A sudden thought struck Kale, born of desperation and inspiration. What if we don't need to gather them physically? Could the Nexus be reconstructed virtually, using simulations based on the legacy's data? The Queen's eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. Such an endeavor would demand unparalleled computational power and precision. Even then, the margin for error would be razor-thin. "It's a risk worth taking," Kale insisted, his voice firm. "If we can simulate the Nexus's functions accurately, we might buy ourselves enough time to implement a permanent solution." After a brief deliberation, the Queen concurred. "Very well. We shall focus our efforts on creating a virtual model of the Nexus. Kale, you will lead this initiative, working alongside our finest engineers and scholars." Over the following hours, Kale immersed himself in the task, collaborating with alien technicians whose expertise complemented his own. Despite initial challenges, language barriers and differing methodologies, they made rapid progress, fueled by a shared sense of purpose. The Queen remained ever present, offering guidance and encouragement, her faith in their mission unwavering. As dawn broke over the alien world, casting ethereal light through the crystalline spires, the team completed the preliminary simulation. It was imperfect, riddled with uncertainties, but it represented a tangible step toward averting catastrophe. Exhausted yet exhilarated, Kale stepped back to observe their handiwork, aware that the true test still lay ahead. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, its fury mirroring the turmoil within. Yet amidst the chaos, a fragile thread of hope began to weave itself into the tapestry of their struggle, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, resilience and ingenuity could pave the way forward. As the simulated harmonic nexus hummed to life within the confines of the alien supercomputer, Kale felt a surge of cautious optimism. The intricate web of algorithms and energy matrices unfolded before him on a holographic display, its complexity rivaling the neural networks of Earth's most advanced AI systems. Beside him, the Queen and her council watched intently, their expressions a blend of awe and apprehension. This was uncharted territory for all of them, a daring attempt to harness theoretical physics and speculative engineering in a bid to stave off cosmic disaster. The simulation ran smoothly at first, projecting counter-frequencies that mirrored the destructive waves emanating from the destabilized star systems. Data streams cascaded across the monitors, showing promising reductions in radiation levels. However, as the simulation progressed, anomalies began to surface, subtle fluctuations that hinted at underlying instabilities. Kale's heart sank as he realized the virtual model wasn't accounting for certain variables, factors that had likely contributed to the original stellar collapse. "We're missing something," he muttered, frantically adjusting parameters and recalibrating equations. "There's an element of unpredictability here that we haven't accounted for." The Queen stepped closer, her gaze sharp and analytical. Could it be residual interference from the architect? Perhaps its influence extends beyond mere manipulation of events. Kale nodded grimly. "It's possible. If this entity tampered with the original Nexus design, embedding hidden flaws, then replicating it, even virtually, might perpetuate those weaknesses. Before they could delve deeper into the issue, a commotion erupted outside the chamber. Guards stationed at the entrance hurriedly ushered in a group of newcomers, aliens clad in ragged robes, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. One of them, a wiry figure with wild eyes, stepped forward, addressing the Queen with urgency. "Your Majesty, we bring dire news. The outer sectors are under attack, ships bearing markings similar to those described in the ancient logs. They claim allegiance to the Architect." A collective gasp rippled through the council, and Kale felt a chill run down his spine. The Architect, once a shadowy figure relegated to fragmented transmissions, was now manifesting as a tangible threat. The Queen's jaw tightened, her composure faltering for the first time since their alliance began. "Prepare the defenses," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "And send scouts to assess the extent of the incursion. We cannot afford to divert resources from the Nexus project, but neither can we ignore this aggression." As the guards dispersed to carry out her orders, Kale turned to the Queen, his mind racing. If the Architect's forces are mobilizing, it means they're aware of our efforts. They'll stop at nothing to sabotage us. "Which is why we must accelerate our timeline," she replied, determination hardening her features. "Kale, you and your team must refine the simulation while I coordinate our military response. Time is no longer on our side." For the next several hours, Kale worked tirelessly alongside the alien engineers, poring over every line of code and recalibrating every variable. The Queen occasionally checked in, providing updates on the skirmishes raging beyond the city limits. Reports indicated that the enemy ships were deploying weapons unlike anything seen before, beams of concentrated energy that disrupted communication networks and destabilized structural integrity fields. Despite the mounting pressure, Kale refused to succumb to despair. He drew strength from the camaraderie forged in the crucible of crisis, the shared resolve of beings united by a common goal. Slowly but surely, the simulation began to stabilize, its predictions aligning more closely with the desired outcomes. Yet even as progress was made, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a battle on multiple fronts, not just against the Architect's forces, but against the specter of their own history. Late into the night, as fatigue weighed heavily on everyone, a breakthrough occurred. One of the alien engineers, a young prodigy with an uncanny knack for pattern recognition, identified a recurring anomaly in the data streams. Upon closer inspection, Kale realized it corresponded to a specific sequence embedded within the legacy artifact, a fail-safe mechanism designed to counteract unforeseen disruptions. "This could be it," he exclaimed, his voice tinged with excitement. The fail-safe might hold the key to stabilizing the Nexus completely. The Queen, who had returned to oversee the final stages of the simulation, regarded him with renewed hope. "Activate it. Let's see if it integrates properly." With bated breath, Kale initiated the sequence, watching as the holographic display shimmered and reconfigured itself. The virtual Nexus expanded, incorporating the failsafe into its core framework. Instantly, the fluctuations ceased, replaced by a steady, harmonious pulse that resonated throughout the chamber. "It's working," one of the engineers whispered, awe evident in her tone. "The Nexus is stabilizing." Relief washed over Kale, though it was short-lived. Outside, the sounds of battle grew louder, punctuated by distant explosions that rattled the crystalline spires. The Queen exchanged a glance with her advisors, silently conveying the gravity of their situation. "We've stabilized the simulation," Kale said, turning to her. "But without physical implementation, it's useless. We need to deploy the Nexus in the affected star systems immediately." The Queen nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we shall take the fight to them. Prepare the fleet. We leave at dawn." As the first rays of alien sunlight filtered through the storm clouds, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield, Kale stood aboard the flagship of the alien armada, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Around him, the crew bustled with purpose, coordinating maneuvers and arming weapon systems in preparation for the impending confrontation. The Queen, clad in ceremonial armor that gleamed with an otherworldly sheen, addressed her troops with a speech that resonated through the ship's corridors, bolstering morale and reinforcing their shared mission. "Today, we reclaim our destiny," she proclaimed, her voice amplified by the ship's communication system. "Not as conquerors, but as guardians of the legacy entrusted to us by our ancestors." Together, we shall restore balance to the cosmos and honor the sacrifices of those who came before. Kale felt a pang of pride mingled with apprehension as he listened to her words. Though he had spent weeks collaborating with these beings, learning their customs and earning their trust, he couldn't shake the awareness that he was still an outsider, a human thrust into the heart of an alien conflict. Yet, paradoxically, it was this very duality that made him indispensable. His unique perspective allowed him to bridge gaps in understanding, to see connections others might overlook. As the fleet launched into hyperspace, hurtling toward the epicenter of the disturbance, Kale retreated to the command center, where the virtual nexus simulation continued to hum with latent power. Engineers monitored its performance meticulously, ensuring that it remained stable during transit. Meanwhile, tactical officers plotted courses and analyzed intelligence reports, piecing together a strategy to outmaneuver the Architect's forces. Upon arrival, the scene that greeted them was both breathtaking and harrowing. The destabilized star system loomed ahead, its once majestic celestial bodies now racked by violent eruptions of energy. Waves of radiation pulsed outward, distorting the fabric of spacetime and threatening to engulf nearby planets. Amidst this chaos, the enemy fleet materialized, a swarm of sleek, angular vessels that exuded menace. Their hulls shimmered with an unnatural iridescence, suggesting advanced cloaking technology or perhaps something more sinister. The Queen wasted no time issuing orders. Deploy the Nexus array. Focus its output on the primary collapse point. We must contain the radiation before it spreads further. Kale watched anxiously as the virtual Nexus interfaced with the physical components hastily assembled aboard the flagship. The transition was seamless, thanks to the refinements made during their simulations. As the Nexus activated, beams of counter-frequency energy lanced outward, intersecting with the destructive waves and neutralizing them in bursts of brilliant light. However, the Architect's forces were not idle. They launched a barrage of attacks, targeting the Nexus array with precision strikes aimed at disabling it. Explosions rocked the flagship, sending shockwaves rippling through the vessel. Kale clung to a console, gritting his teeth as alarms blared and emergency protocols engaged. "Shields are holding, but barely," reported one of the tactical officers. "Enemy reinforcements are incoming." The Queen's expression darkened, but she remained steadfast. "Divert auxiliary power to the shields. Keep the Nexus operational at all costs." Kale sprang into action, assisting the engineering team in rerouting energy reserves. His hands flew over the controls, his movements guided by instinct honed through countless hours of practice. Around him, the alien crew worked with equal fervor, their dedication inspiring him to push beyond his limits. Just when it seemed the tide might turn against them, a new development unfolded. From the depths of the star system, a second fleet emerged, smaller but equally formidable. These ships bore markings reminiscent of the ancient Alliance, their designs a fusion of human and alien aesthetics. At their helm was a figure Kale recognized instantly. Captain Leora, a renegade alien commander rumored to have gone rogue after rejecting the Queen's leadership decades ago. Leora hailed the flagship, her voice crackling over the comms. "Queen Silra, I offer my aid. The Architect's tyranny ends today." Silra hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. Finally, she nodded curtly. "Accepted. Coordinate your forces with ours. We strike as one." With Leora's reinforcements bolstering their ranks, the tide of battle shifted dramatically. The combined fleets executed a pincer maneuver, trapping the Architect's forces between converging lines of fire. Simultaneously, the Nexus array reached peak efficiency, its counter-frequencies enveloping the collapsing stars and stabilizing their cores. Yet victory remained elusive. As the last of the enemy ships disintegrated under relentless assault, a massive vessel emerged from the heart of the disturbance, a monolithic construct bristling with weaponry and radiating an aura of malevolence. At its center floated a figure wreathed in shadow, its presence suffusing the battlefield with dread. "The Architect," Silra whispered, her voice tinged with both awe and revulsion. Kale felt a chill run down his spine as the entity addressed them, its voice a cacophony of whispers that reverberated through the void. "You dare defy me? After all I have done to elevate your kind?" Silra stepped forward, her armor gleaming defiantly. "Your elevation comes at too great a cost. We reject your dominion." The Architect chuckled, a sound devoid of mirth. then perish, along with your misguided ideals. As the monolith unleashed a devastating salvo, Kale realized the true nature of the conflict. This was not merely a battle for survival, it was a struggle for identity, for the right to define one's destiny free from manipulation. And in that moment, he understood what he must do. With renewed determination, Kale interfaced directly with the Nexus array, channeling every ounce of his resolve into amplifying its output. The Queen and her allies rallied around him, their combined efforts fueling the Nexus to unprecedented levels. Beams of pure energy converged, striking the monolith with unrelenting force. For a fleeting instant, the architect faltered, its form flickering like a dying flame. Seizing the opportunity, Kale initiated the final protocol, a cascade of frequencies designed to dismantle the entity's essence. The battlefield erupted in a blinding flash, obliterating the monolith and silencing the architect's voice forever. When the light faded, silence reigned. The destabilized stars stabilized, their radiant glow restored. Across the fleet, cheers erupted as survivors embraced one another, celebrating a hard-won victory. Yet amidst the jubilation, Kale felt a profound sense of loss, for the lives sacrificed, for the scars left behind, and for the realization that peace was fragile, always teetering on the brink of collapse. As the Queen approached him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and sorrow, Kale knew their journey was far from over. The echoes of the past would continue to resonate, shaping the future in ways none could predict. But for now, they had secured a reprieve, a chance to rebuild and redefine their shared legacy. And in that fragile hope, Kale found solace.